Hey, good morning again to everybody. For those of you who were here at 9 o'clock, for those of you who joined us shortly after that, good morning to you. Welcome to this webinar this morning. My name is Anissa. I'm the coordinator of the National Shelter Movement of South Africa. Today, our webinar is focused on mental health. And we all know that, in South Africa, actually, all over the world, people are struggling with mental health. As we go generation by generation, there's intergenerational trauma. People are struggling with trauma as a whole, gender-based violence, especially with us working in the gender-based violence and femicide space. We know that violence, trauma is affecting most people. We see it often also at our 24-hour helpline when we're trying to place people, survivors in shelters. Shelters are experiencing it where survivors are struggling with mental health. So, gender-based violence and non-gender-based violence cases, I think mental health is a big issue for a lot of people. And so we decided to have Michelle join us this morning to present on such an important topic. I'm not going to keep you too long. We've got a good presentation ahead of us. I'm quickly going to introduce you to our presenter, Michelle Donnelly. So Michelle is a communications professional driven by advocacy, social justice, and the belief that storytelling can change lives. South African Federation of Mental Health. She leads communications and awareness initiatives, shapes mental health messaging for campaigns and media, um, and strengthens the organization's brand to grow its impact. She collaborates closely with partners, managers, publicity and content development, and supporters in delivering meaningful, people-centered advocacy. So there you go. I'm going to hand you over to Michelle. Enjoy the presentation. But also, before I hand you over, I just want to stress if everybody can put their devices on mute so that we don't disrupt the presentation in any way. I'll really appreciate that. Thank you, everybody. Over to you, Michelle, and welcome. And thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me, Anissa. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start sharing my screen for the presentation. I appreciate the lovely welcome. Good morning, everyone. As Anissa was saying, one thing since being in touch with the National Shelter Movement that's come across is that, mental health is an issue that everyone is struggling with. But the main thing seems to also be the fact that there isn't a lot of mental health awareness, and really an understanding about mental health. And that's fair enough because we do experience that, actually across the board with people that we speak to. People still really don't understand mental health. And so I hope that this webinar will be a bit of an introduction into what mental health is, your understanding of it, how to expand that understanding, take a look at the ways we can take care of our mental
Take
health,
care of
which
our
is
mental
very
health.
important to understanding mental health. And overall, just make people understand that our mental health is something that's so important and we all need to be taking care of it. So as I mentioned, that's just a bit of an agenda that we'll go through. We'll look at what is mental health. We'll unpack some mental health conditions. We'll look at how you can take care of your mental health. We'll then address women and mental health and kind of look at that gender bias that exists within mental health. And then also speak a bit to something that is still a major issue within mental health, and that is stigma. We'll look at what stigma is and ways that we can address it as well. So, just to introduce myself again, I am Michelle Donnelly. I'm the Communications and Awareness Lead at the SA Federation for Mental Health. So, the SA Federation for Mental Health, or SAFMH, is the largest national mental health advocacy and awareness federation in the country. We've been around for over 100 years, so a very long time. And we work at a very strategic level, focusing on working with national departments, government departments to make sure that wherever policies are being discussed, mental health is on the agenda as well. We work with global partners, as well as community partners. And so our community partners, we have 16 that are connected to us directly. And they're found across the country. You will find at least one of our community-based organizational partners in one of the provinces. We call them our mental health societies. Our community-based partners are the ones who provide day-to-day mental health services in communities that are often quite vulnerable and under-resourced as well. And so something to note as well about our organization is that we are an advocacy organization. We are focused on human rights, advocating for the human rights of mental health care users in the country, and also raising awareness about mental health for the general population. So as advocates, we focus on mental health for all. Now, we are very different to clinicians. I am not a clinician. A clinician is someone like a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a mental health social worker, a mental health nurse. These people really focus on an individual person's mental health. So we are not clinicians at the Federation. We are advocates. So just kind of giving you that distinction. So I can share awareness and material, and a lot of the information I'm sharing with you is based on evidence-based research. That's the work we do. I cannot diagnose anyone and I cannot prescribe medication. I hope that makes sense. So I just want us to do a bit of an intro into mental health. And what I really love to do to kind of get started with that is a bit of an interactive time through something called a Mentimeter. So it's like a live survey we'll do. So I'm going to share the link into the chat. There's also this QR code that you can feel free to scan. I'm just going to pop it here. I'm going to say send chat to everyone. And you can click on that code and I will meet you on the Mentimeter page, just so we can kind of see where everyone's understanding of mental health is in the room. I find that it's always very interesting to see people's thoughts. So I'm just going to stop sharing that screen for now and then start the presentation in Menti. If anyone's having any problems, please just let me know. You can unmute yourselves. We'll pop something into the chat. I'm going to share that code again. I see some people have joined, got about 10 participants. And I'm just going to get the first slide started. So what you'll start seeing coming up is a bit of a word cloud. But really the first question is to ask, when you hear mental health, what words come to mind? There's no right or wrong answer. We just really want to hear what people's thoughts are when it comes to mental health. See someone asked to please share it again. I am going to share that link again. The code is here, Kathy. There you go. Perfect. So yeah, no wrong or right words. We'd love to just hear what people are saying. Great. We've got some answers coming through. Medicine, depression, stress, health, disadvantage, right? Psychological state, lack of support. I see stigma, stress, centering oneself, right? Mental imbalance. Okay. Seeing anxiety, contentment, peace. Okay. These are great words. Please, yeah, feel free to let them all keep coming. Again, as I said, there's no right or wrong words, just really when you're hearing mental health, what is coming to mind? See bipolar coming up as well, psychological well-being, isolation. I see depression is getting bigger as well. So that means a lot of people are associating mental health with that word depression. Right, more coming in. See big words really being anxiety, depression, stress. That's really coming through. Issues of the soul. Wow. Yeah. Unrest as well coming in. I see people adding their thoughts in the chat. We've got depression, anxiety. Yep, we have stress, anxiety, depression. Okay. Great. Thanks, guys. You can put through more if you want. But I really see these three big things coming through, which is anxiety, depression, and stress. And so what's interesting to see here is that really when we're hearing the word mental health, we're kind of associating it with a mental health condition automatically, right? Or almost immediately, with regards to saying things like depression, anxiety, stress. And one thing I will say is that these are all very interesting words, and at least they're not stigmatizing words. One thing that when we do these presentations and we do this exercise, a lot of people will use that stigmatizing language that comes out. They'll say crazy, violent, institutions, hospital. And so they really kind of conflate mental health with that clinical side, and also those stigmatized words as well, which is not what we want to do. So it's great to see that not a lot of people are using that kind of language, but really interesting to see that what is coming through is that association with mental health conditions. Okay, so the next question I have is what is mental health in your own words? So if you just have to describe it, there is a definition that we'll look at from the World Health Organization. There's a standard definition, but it's always interesting just to kind of see what people are thinking about if they had to write it into a sentence. What is mental health in your own words? You can also feel free to pop it into the chat and I can read it there too. Again, there's no right or wrong answers. Please don't feel like this is a test or anyone's going to be wrong. It really is just trying to understand what it is um, in your own words. Again, just to for me to gauge people's understandings, and it also just helps everyone in the room see what everyone is thinking as well. I see someone in the chat saying mentally unstable. Okay, so that's mental health in your own words. Okay, got some answers coming through. I see physical imbalance in the body, which causes people to struggle. Yep. Disturbance of the mind affecting thinking and memory, right? The feeling that I can be my authentic self. Great. Yeah, these are all great, guys. Please keep it coming. It is to be holistically healthy and overall well-being. Yeah, these are really interesting understandings. Cope with life. Yeah. And remember, everything we understand is really helpful from our own states of understanding as well. I see people in the chat and sharing as well your mental, psychological, social well-being. I feel like people are looking at the WHO understanding or the WHO definition. Someone saying understanding of own well-being and abilities. Yep. Refers to person's emotional well-being coming through. Mental health is a state of emotional, psychological, and social well-being that enables people to cope with life stresses, realize their abilities, learn, and work well. That's great. It is the state of mind that enables you to cope with daily stresses. Yep. Coping with life stresses, mental disturbance of the emotions and feelings. Yeah. These are all great. Thank you, guys. Coming back to the mentee, we've got mental wellness. We've got a state of mind and well-being based on circumstances and ability to cope and navigate through life. It is the ability of being able to cope, which impacts ability to respond and navigate life. Yeah, that's a great one. It's a state of not being okay mentally, right? We've got numbness, depression, irritability, mental instability, unhealthy relationships, not coping. Interesting. Mental health is an illness that is the consequence of problems encountered and not dealt with and bottled anger, right? And a state of emotional, psychological, social well-being that enables individuals to manage life stresses. Yeah, thanks, guys. These are all great. Thank you for participating in the chat as well. I hope it was a worthwhile exercise. From my side, it's always interesting just again to see what people are thinking, because once we get into the actual research, the evidence as well, you'll start to see your definition slowly change as well. Mind and emotional state. Lovely. Thanks, everyone. So with our next slide, really the focus is trying to see how often we're taking care of our mental health. So you'll see that the term self-care is really part of understanding mental health and understanding how to take care of one's own mental health. And we'll get into it a bit later in the presentation. But for now, I just wanted to see, how often people are using these self-care activities. These are found to be just your very basic self-care activities based on research that are very good for your mental health. So we'd love to see what people are doing, if they're doing anything at all. So the first one is being in nature, spending time with loved ones, prayer, journaling or writing, exercise, reading, or listening to music. And then you can just kind of rate them as well. Okay, so we've got some votes coming through. See prayer being a big one. Also spending time with loved ones and listening to music. Yeah. Being in nature is up there. So it's exercise and journaling and reading is on the end. Yeah. Journaling. It's very interesting. Every time I do this exercise, journaling is like at the end, at the end. A lot of people don't like to write, but it's very, very good for you. But we'll get into that as well. Yeah, prayer and listening to music are neck and neck here. And again, that's also very, very similar to all the presentations we do. I will say majority of the time people are saying prayer and listening to music is what they're using most to take care of their mental health. People can also feel free to pop in the chat. I see swimming in the sea. Great. Swimming's amazing. Listening to music, spending time with loved ones and reading. Um, Nature a few times a month. Great. Meditation. We've got music, praying, family time. Yeah. Nature, prayer, exercise, music, drawing. Yeah. Drawing's a great one as well. It's definitely art is up there. Coloring in. It's also been proven to really help, to just kind of calm oneself, especially if they're feeling very stressed. We've got cooking, amazing self-care pampering. Yes, that also counts. Don't let anyone tell you it doesn't. Prayer, listening to music, spending time with family, games, great. Like gaming, like PlayStation games, yeah. Spending time with loved ones, prayer, listening to music, nail therapy, lovely. Crocheting and knitting, mindful exercise. These are all great. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for participating. And I do see, if we look at the final votes, prayer seems to have won, following closely to listening to music and then spending time with loved ones. Again, these are all very, very interesting results that come through. And it basically is very similar every time we do these kind of awareness sessions. We do a lot of these sessions with corporates, and other organizations, including NGOs as well. And it's really very similar answers that come through. So we need to kind of get people to start journaling a bit more and encourage that as well. But thanks so much, everyone, for participating. I really appreciate it. We will get back into the presentation now. As I said, it was just great to kind of gauge what everyone's thoughts were about mental health, before we get into what the literature says as well. So I'm just going to go back to sharing my screen and I'll present. Right. So mental health. Some people got this definition. I'm thinking some people maybe went to the World Health Organization website, to see what is mental health. But the World Health Organization does define mental health as your emotional, your psychological, and your social well-being. And it's really how we feel, it's how we think, and it's how we behave. What's interesting to note, and I think something that didn't really come through with our word cloud, because a lot of people are associating it with mental health condition, but mental health is something we all have, right? By virtue by having a brain, the same way we have our physical health, we have mental health. And the same way we prioritize taking care of our physical health, we make sure we're eating a good diet, taking those vegetables and fruits, taking vitamin supplements, going to the doctor when we're not feeling great, going to the gym. We really prioritize physical health. And a lot of the times we're not prioritizing our mental health. And we need to start doing that because we all have mental health. And so the same way we take care of our physical health, we need to be taking care of our mental health. Also important to note, we all have mental health. And because we all live in this world, our mental health exists on a spectrum from good mental health to poor mental health. And of course, We don't live in a utopia. We're not living in a world that's perfect. So at certain points in our lifetime, we will find ourselves on the spectrum between good mental health and poor mental health, right? We live in uncertain times. We have financial stresses. We grieve, we lose people. We go through so much uncertainty. Things like divorce happen, moves, like there's just so much that can happen in our lifetime. So depending on what we're experiencing, we will find ourselves on the spectrum from good mental health to poor mental health. But the idea is that we need to be knowing ourselves and the good habits we can do to pull ourselves up into good mental health. We want to maintain good mental health the same way we maintain good physical health. And it's important that we start prioritizing that. What's important to note about mental health as well is that mental health is not a mental health condition or a mental illness or a mental health disorder. So those terms kind of get used interchangeably, but for this presentation and in the work that SAFMH does, we refer to it as a mental health condition. So this is just a slide talking about terminology, because within the field of mental health, terms are always changing. So people will ask, is it mental health condition, mental health disorder? Is it mental illness? Is it poor mental health issues, mental ill health? And you'll find a lot of people will interchange the language depending on the research you're reading. And if you're ever wondering, what's the correct term to use, especially if you're speaking to a person with lived experience, I think it really depends, again, on the person. And so it's important that we ask. So if you are working with persons with mental health conditions and you're wondering how to refer to their mental health condition, just ask and they'll let you know. A lot of people say that they do prefer the term mental illness because it helps people to take it more seriously as well. So, what is a mental health condition? Now, a mental health condition is a clinically significant disturbance in one's thoughts, in one's emotional regulation, so our feelings, as well as our behavior. Mental health conditions are very complex. And it's something that can only be diagnosed by a mental health care professional, right? So, like I was talking about those clinicians, a clinical psychologist, clinical social worker, psychiatric nurse, or psychiatrist. And it can only be diagnosed following an assessment, just like any other health condition that people can get. It's very interesting that when it comes to mental health conditions, we're so quick to diagnose other people, to diagnose ourselves, compared to other medical health conditions, which usually we understand only the doctor can diagnose. And so the same with a mental health condition. Only a clinician can diagnose a mental health condition. Now, not everyone will develop a mental health condition in their lifetime, but it is normal. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 8 people in the world currently lives with a mental health condition. And when we're talking mental health conditions, we're speaking to things like depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, anxiety disorder, schizophrenia. Um, there's many different types of mental health conditions. And so it is quite a normal thing for people to be diagnosed with. And the number is quite higher. South Africa does experience higher rates of mental health conditions. We do have an issue with data in the country, so gathering direct data is very difficult. But a study that was done in 2022 in the country shows that 25.7% of South Africans are probably depressed. So it is a lot more common than we expect. But again, not everyone will be living with a mental health condition. I think the main thing for us as advocates that we really try to put across is that there is nothing shameful about having a mental health condition, about being diagnosed with one or living with one. The same way there's nothing shameful about living with diabetes or high blood pressure or cancer, right? That's really what we try to reiterate with a mental health condition, because people still shy away from getting that help and from being diagnosed because of the shame and stigma that comes with it. So really reiterating that there is nothing shameful. As I was saying, what causes a mental health condition is still, kind of something that researchers are figuring out. There's no one reason. It's really a complex interplay of so many factors at an individual, community, and structural level. All of these things can affect whether or not you might develop a mental health condition. It's also important to note that anyone can get a mental health condition, right? Not just one certain type of person. Anyone can be diagnosed with one. When it comes to looking at the factors that can cause a mental health condition, research does point to certain things, including genetics. So yes, there is research that shows a connection between, if your parents live with a mental health condition, you could develop a mental health condition as well. That's not to say that it definitely would be. It's just that it could be a factor. But also things like your life experiences, these can really factor whether or not you develop a mental health condition. So, have you experienced abuse? Do you live in a conflict area or conflict zone? Um, do you live in poverty? Protracted situations, social issues that can also really affect whether or not you can develop a mental health condition. Um, and then also how you look after your mental health is very important. And all of these can really point to whether or not you are at a higher risk of developing a mental health condition. But again, there is no one way. You can't be like, oh, that person lives in poverty, they have a mental health condition. No, it really will depend again on that assessment that you would have with a mental health professional before getting a diagnosis. But it is important that we understand that people's circumstances at an individual, community, and structural level can all play a role in whether or not they get a mental health condition. Also, mental health conditions live on a spectrum as well, from no mental health condition to a severe mental health condition as well. So this is just an interesting poster that was put together by the NCD Alliance, and I think it's really great because it kind of speaks to the protective factors for mental health. So the things that would enhance our mental health and kind of protect it, and then the risks, the things that can undermine our mental health and can really cause us to experience poor mental health or maybe develop a mental health condition. So at the individual level, speaking to, again, genetic factors, one's social and emotional skills, one sense of self, how we're taking care of our physical health as well, if we're partaking in good physical activity. At a family and community level, was there good perinatal nutrition? Did we have good parenting? Do we have positive social networks and positive relationships? Do we have access to green spaces? Do we ourselves feel safe and secure in our homes and in our environments? And then structurally, it's, economic security. Do we have good quality infrastructure? Do you have equal access to services? Do you have, these green spaces, a quality natural environment? Are your rights respected? Do you have access to social justice? Is your income protected? And do you experience social and gender equality as well? So all of these things are really protective factors. They're good for our mental health. And if we have these things in order, it's really easy to kind of protect and take care of our mental health. Then if we look at the risks, the things that can undermine one's mental health at an individual level, again, genetic factors, our education levels, whether or not we're using substances, an unhealthy diet, things like obesity, chronic disease, vitamin D deficiencies could speak to it as well. Are we getting enough sleep? Things like that. Then at a family and community level, again, speaking to things like, are you experiencing sexual abuse and violence? Have you been emotionally and physically abused or neglected? Was there substance use by a parent? Did you experience bullying, IPV, if you've been in war, the sudden loss of a loved one, so you grieving, job loss, urban living, if you're from an ethnic minority, so those kind of, prejudices as well, if you experience that. And then structurally, it's, you're living in poor quality infrastructure. Do you have poor to no access to any kind of services? Do you experience injustice or discrimination or social inclusion? Social, economic, and gender inequalities all undermine mental health. The climate crisis, as we're seeing more and more research come out about it as well. If you live in conflict spaces and you're being forced to leave your home and be displaced, and health emergencies at a structural level as well. So this is really a great way for us to understand the protective factors as well as the risk factors for mental health. Again, it's important to reiterate that mental health and mental health conditions are not the same thing. Mental health is something we all have, compared to mental health conditions, which is something that some people can develop, and it can only be diagnosed by a clinician. And again, there's no shame if you are diagnosed. I just want to share a video. This video was done by one of our partners called Masiviwe, and they really focus on mental health communications. And it really is a helpful video for you to understand everything I've said, but in a short, succinct way, and for you to really understand that, our mental health exists on this spectrum or continuum that we will experience throughout our lives. So I'm just going to go ahead and play. I think audio should be there as well. Yes. So I'm just going to play. If you can't hear, please just let me know in the chat.
How are you feeling today? Not just in your body, but what's going on in your mind, your thoughts, and how is that affecting everything else? Mental health is very changeable. It's helpful to think of our mental health moving through different levels. Sometimes you're well or even thriving. Other times, just managing. Or maybe your level will shift to struggling or unwell. These changes might be over days, weeks, or even months to years. Even people with a severe mental health condition will go through different phases. When you are thriving, you are on top of the world. These are special times that should be enjoyed and appreciated. When you're well, you feel content and able to manage life's challenges. Stay here by practicing self-care, exercising, eating healthily, and getting enough sleep. If you're just managing, life feels a little tougher. Maybe you're a bit tired, stressed, or distracted. Take breaks and practice deep breathing. Talk to a friend or do something fun to recharge. When you're struggling, things feel hard. You might feel down, have headaches, or struggle to sleep. This is your signal to reach out. Talk to someone who can help. And don't stop all your self-care practices. If you're unwell, you might feel extremely hopeless or stuck. You may be unable to manage your day-to-day life. This is when professional support, like a counselor, doctor, or social worker, is crucial to help you move back towards being well. You might also need medication to help you. Most of the time, we're somewhere in the middle. The goal is to keep moving towards feeling better, bit by bit. If you slide the other way, it's okay to not be okay. It happens to everyone. Even if you have a mental health condition, you won't always feel unwell. Everyone has good and bad days. Knowing where you are with your mental health helps you look after yourself and get the support you need.
Great. So yeah, I hope that video was a bit helpful. Sorry, in understanding a bit more of what I was explaining, and kind of giving you that like visual representation of what it is when we're saying, our mental health exists on a spectrum. So with this graph, what I really want to speak to is that last point, really that was said in the video, which is just because you have a mental health condition doesn't mean you'll always feel unwell. And it's something that we get a lot of pushback on when we look at this left-hand top corner, speaking to someone with a severe mental health condition and good mental health. Because the truth is, a person with good mental health but who's also diagnosed and living with a severe mental health condition, is that they can still feel good about themselves and their relationships. Someone who has been diagnosed with a mental health condition, who's getting the treatment that they need, their individualized treatment plan, they have family that are supportive, they have friends who understand them, they have a employer that provides them with the right accommodations. They're able to really cope with stress and manage their day-to-day lives. They can still live a full and fulfilling and great life. And so that's how they're having good mental health. And a lot of people say, no, you can't have schizophrenia and have good mental health, but you really can, because the whole point of having good mental health is a person who's feeling good about themselves and their relationships, someone who's able to cope well with life and the daily stresses, understanding that we do go through ebbs and flows in life, but knowing that we understand how to take care of ourselves and to also cope with those stresses. That's really important. And so, yeah, a person with a mental health condition can have good mental health compared to something that we try to avoid. And this is why we want people to really be understanding mental health and wanting to take care of themselves, is because you could have no mental health condition, but you are experiencing protracted poor mental health, and you will find yourself feeling completely hopeless. You're disconnected from others, and you can really struggle to take care of yourself. And so this is the space we don't want to find ourselves in. So this quadrant is really kind of showing the different phases or spaces that you can find yourself with regards to mental health. When we look at the bottom left-hand side, someone with a severe mental health condition and poor mental health, this is someone who might be struggling to interact with others, struggling to take care of themselves. And these are usually people that our community-based organizations, some of them have residential facilities, and the people who live there are really finding themselves in this space as well. It's people who usually, they don't know they have a mental health condition, so they've been living with it for a really long time, they've just never understood how to take care of their mental health, and so they find themselves in that space when they maybe move into our residential facilities or start seeking mental health help. But through the time at their residential facility or through the time of accessing mental health services, they can also pull themselves into a space of good mental health as well. So yeah, it's just a really interesting quadrant to kind of share and for people to have that understanding of the spectrum of mental health. I just wanted to pause there to see if there were any questions, especially when it comes to, yeah, this quadrant and this understanding of good mental health whilst having a mental health condition as well. You can pop the question into the chat, or you can, feel free to unmute yourself. We will have a time for Q&A. I just wanted to pause here in case anyone had a rebuttal or wanted to share something here as well. No? Okay. We'll move on to the next slide. So just to share some examples of mental health conditions, and again, something we try not to do at the Federation is kind of give a list of symptoms for mental health conditions, because again, the only people who can diagnose is a clinician. And also it's important to note that mental health conditions actually manifest differently in different people. So there is no one direct way of experiencing a certain mental health condition as well. So but I'm just going to share a bit of a description of these common mental health conditions, just so you have an understanding. So depression, it is one of the most common mental health conditions, and it involves a depressed mood where you kind of have loss of pleasure, of interest in doing activities you usually love doing for long periods of time, right? We know that sometimes we will all feel sadness and we'll go through dips of low mood. And we kind of conflate that with depression, but it's important to note that depression is something that lasts for very long periods of time. And it is different again from regular mood changes, as I was mentioning, and those regular feelings we have about everyday life. And it's important that we kind of speak to depression and hold space for it, because a lot of people try, to undermine depression because they assume, well, I get sad sometimes as well. And it's very different to that. Sorry, I just see something in the chat. Someone saying, if I think of my work as a social worker, you swing between the quadrants, and it's important to take note of warning signs and take action. 100%. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. And I'm glad that that quadrant can be helpful there. So then when we look at anxiety, people, again, with anxiety disorders, you're often experiencing fear and worry that's very intense and very excessive. And these feelings are also accompanied at times with physical tension, and maybe other behavioral and cognitive symptoms as well. think with anxiety, again, people use the word a lot. We use the term a lot. I have anxiety, which takes away from anxiety disorders, which can be very crippling for some people as well. Then bipolar disorder, it's a mental health condition characterized by mood swings, really from one extreme to another. And these extremes, and these episodes can cause significant difficulties, both manic and depressive episodes. And there's also two types of bipolar disorder that's important to note. There's bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 as well. And then schizophrenia, it's one of the more misunderstood mental health conditions because people assume it in one way of just hearing voices, but it really can be experienced differently. And what schizophrenia really is that it causes psychosis that is associated with considerable disability for some, and it may affect all areas of people's lives. So that's their personal lives, family, social, educational, as well as their work lives as well. I'm just going to play a video. The next two videos I'm going to play is just speaking to what I was alluding to, behind the difference between like depression and sadness, anxiety versus stress. It's important that we understand this difference because it also helps us to have a bit more empathy for people who are living with depressive disorder or anxiety disorder as well.
This is Stephanie and Juliet. Stephanie is feeling nervous because she has a huge deadline tomorrow. Stephanie is stressed. Juliet is feeling nervous for an unknown reason. Juliet has anxiety. Stephanie goes over her annual budget. It's extremely stressful. Juliet finally has a moment to herself. She still feels anxious. Stephanie has a conversation with Juliet. She enjoys the conversation. Juliet has a conversation with Stephanie. She feels uncomfortable and will later overanalyze everything she said. Stephanie decides to take a break and have lunch. She feels recharged. Juliet decides to take a break and have lunch. She still feels anxious. Stephanie sleeps after a long day at work. She's happy to finally put the day behind her. Juliet can't sleep. She goes over her schedule for tomorrow over and over again. Yes, stress can be difficult, but it's not the same as having an anxiety disorder. When someone opens up about their anxiety, don't respond with, "I've been stressed too." Listen. Depression is not just sadness. Depression is weight that keeps you in bed. While sadness is a tangible feeling, depression can feel empty, like nothing at all. Depression and sadness can sometimes look alike. But while it's easier to talk about what's making us sad, depression can be unexplainable and leaves us silent. In the end, depression keeps you stuck. Fun cannot fix it. Instead, it isolates you from what you love. Sadness is a very real and difficult emotion to process, but depression is an overwhelming numbness that requires professional help. Both feelings are valid, but if someone opens up to you about their depression, don't say, "I've been sad too." Listen.
Yeah, so those videos were really kind of speaking to what I'd mentioned about how we can speak to other people who might be experiencing, depressive disorder or anxiety disorder, but also so that we can understand that there is a real difference between the two. I saw that there was a question in the chat. Mental health awareness should be praised. However, how does one distinguish temporary sadness or nervousness feelings from dysfunctional or abnormal behavior? And I think what's important to note is that, terms like, dysfunctional, abnormal behavior, these are the things that can maybe stress us out, right? And it's why we won't want to then ask for help because we're worried, oh, now I'm not normal, I'm sick, I'm crazy, all those kind of words. But the truth is, the only way to know is for you to know yourself. So if you are experiencing a stressful time at work, for example, but you know that it's only stressful because you have a deadline, right? You have a project that is due, and you know that once that project is done, you'll be able to get some alone time, your me time, and the stress will subside. But if the project comes and goes and you are still feeling that conflation of stress and it is compounding, you would then start to think, maybe I should seek some help. I really need that extra support. So it isn't for you to decide, oh, now I'm sick and I don't want to have to go to the doctor because there's something wrong with me. I think we need to start looking at our mental health and our feelings the same way we look at our physical health, you know? If I'm coughing, I know that, oh, actually, if I just take some ACC, Efferflu-C, get some rest, you know, within a couple of days, that flu clears up. But within those couple of days, if the flu hasn't cleared up, we start thinking maybe it's an infection and I could see the doctor and they will then prescribe the antibiotics. And it's the same with our mental health. If you are feeling in a really low mood for 2-3 months and you are not getting better by doing those activities, you know, those self-care activities, to help your mental health, to make yourself feel better, then it is important that you do seek some support and care because you deserve to. Everyone deserves support and care, and that help does exist as well. Just important points again is that we all need to be taking care of our mental health. It is our health. You know, in the mental health space, the idea is that one day we won't have to exist because we'll only be speaking about health overall. But the problem is we do have to really focus on mental health because it's a crisis worldwide. And because physical health has been given so much dominance, we need to talk about it. So we all need to be taking care of our mental health because there is no health without mental health. And again, there's nothing shameful about having a mental health condition. We need to be looking after our mental health conditions as well, and really following specific treatment plans that are given to us. If we are diagnosed with a mental health condition, it's important that we follow a treatment plan, that we want to take care of ourselves, because if we don't, that's really where we kind of slip into that territory of not being able to take care of ourselves, and finding ourselves in a really, really dark space as well. It's also important for us to know that it's our jobs to know ways to take care of ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's so important for us to take care of ourselves and to prioritize that as well. So I just want to speak to looking after our mental health as well, because looking after your mental health and understanding how to do that is an important part of understanding mental health overall. So the first thing, again, is self-care. As I mentioned in the activity we did, self-care really is about doing behaviors that are good for you, that help you feel fulfilled and help you feel yourself again. Self-care is different for everyone, right? So what might work for me won't work for the next person. So it's really important that you know the self-care activities that work for you, to find those things and to do it consistently. There's no point in only starting to do the self-care when you're already feeling at your lowest of lows. You haven't gotten out of bed in a couple of days. You don't want to go to work. You know, at that point, just doing self-care activities aren't going to help. And so when you find yourself, you know, struggling with some sleep, you know, if you find yourself getting quite irritable, faster to anger, that's when you know, I need to start creating that space for myself and the time to be doing my self-care activities. And people will assume, you know, self-care just is about taking myself out for lunch, getting my nails done. But it really depends on you. It depends what it is for you. And it's really important. For some people, self-care looks like making sure they have 8 hours of sleep every night. They drink, you know, 6 to 8 glasses of water. They follow a balanced diet. They walk every day. You know, some people might have to do more than one self-care activity. For other people, as we were looking at that activity we did, it is prayer. It's prioritizing spending time with loved ones. For others, it's listening to music. And it's great if it's a mix of things, but it's so important that we know our go-to self-care activities. I'm someone who has made use of mental health care services in the past. And I'm also someone who understands what it means to take care of my mental health and prioritizing self-care. So for me, I do know that sleep is important. I know that I have to walk every day. So I'm not a gym girly. Some people, the gym is for them. But gym is not for me. I need to be outside. So I make sure I walk every day. I'm one of those people who tries to get those 10,000 steps in a day. But, you know, sometimes even just a walk around my block, a walk around my complex is exactly what I need. And that's something I know I have to do daily to get through the day and to make sure I'm feeling really strong as well. And journaling is also something I do. And I also love to hike. So it's really important that you know what it is that you can do to take care of your mental health. And then the other important part of taking care of your mental health is reaching out when you're struggling. This is the part that a lot of people struggle with. And of course, we understand mental health can still be so misunderstood and stigmatizing. But as I mentioned, not everyone has a mental health condition. Not everyone will develop one. So experiencing poor mental health is normal. But it's also important to know that if I'm experiencing poor mental health and my self-care activities are not helping me to feel better, then reaching out for help is my next step as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. Whether that's reaching out, we have a help desk at the Federation where we are a referral service. So we will provide a referral to wherever your area is. Maybe you want a counselor, maybe it's someone online, maybe you do want a therapist. The other thing that you can do is we have a national suicide crisis line run by SADAG, the South African Anxiety and Depression Group. We always encourage people to, reach out there as well. But a lot of the time, the first point of call is your GP. If you're like, look, I'm kind of struggling, I don't know where to turn to, you can go to your GP and they can help you find that care as well. So these are just some evidence-based activities as well on how you can take care of your mental health. First one, getting closer to nature. There's an abundance of evidence and research that shows that just being in nature, whether it's gardening, whether it's getting out to, the mountains or hiking trails or walking in your local park, it's really important for your mental health and it can help you to feel calmer as well. A big part of taking care of your mental health is really learning to understand your feelings, and that will help you then know how you can manage those feelings. So again, the only person who's going to know if you're not doing well is you. And so being able to understand where you're at and asking yourself where you are at, very honestly, is part of taking care of your mental health. Again, being aware of misusing substances, indulging in substances is not going to help you cope with difficult feelings. And so trying to stay away from that is very important, and not using substances as a mechanism to take care of your mental health. Also, research shows that being kind, volunteering in your local community, just giving back in some way is really helpful for your mental health. It's like gives you that quick dopamine fix as well. And then something that's important that a lot of people really need to think about is how are we taking care of our finances? Financial stress is real. We're living in economic uncertainties, but making sure that we are not sitting in debt, that we don't have money problems, that's really important for our mental health as well. I'm just going to share another video, but this one really is speaking to how one can start asking for help. I think that's the biggest issue we have, not just in South Africa, but globally. Asking for help is a really difficult thing to do. And sometimes people are like, well, where do I start? What do I say? And there aren't any magic words. But I hope this video will kind of just give you an understanding of maybe where you can start. Yep, sorry. Just go back.
For lots of us, finding the word for help can be a real struggle, even when we're feeling well. But if you're trying to open up about your mental health for the first time, it can feel even harder. For many of us, our GP is the person we have that first conversation with, but they are also often someone we hardly know and can be really busy. This can make us feel uncomfortable talking about our deepest and most personal feelings. You may have been worrying more than usual. Maybe you're finding it hard to enjoy life. Or you're not sleeping. If you're having any thoughts and feelings which are making your day-to-day life difficult, it's always okay to ask for help. Here are some ideas on how. Prepare. Give yourself lots of time to get to your appointment, so you don't feel rushed or stressed. Write down what you want to say in advance. Find words or phrases that represent how you feel. Or print out any information that helps you describe what's going on for you. If you have a lot to say, ask the receptionist for a longer appointment. Taking the time pressure off might help you to relax and open up about how you feel. Ask a friend or family member who knows you well to come with you. They can back you up if you're feeling nervous or unsure of what you're saying. Be honest and open. Tell the doctor how you're feeling. What has it been like being you over the past few months? Don't worry about fitting in with any particular diagnosis. Use the words and descriptions that feel natural to you. There's no secret passwords to getting help, no specific things you need to say or do. There is no wrong way to tell someone how you're feeling. Try not to worry that your problems are too small or unimportant. Everyone deserves help. Yes, everyone. Yes, you.
Great. So yeah, I hope that video just kind of gives you a bit of an understanding of how you can go about asking for help, but just also reiterating that you do deserve help. Everyone does. And that there's no magic words, again, for how to ask for help. As advocates within the mental health space, we really reiterate the fact that it's okay to not be okay. Someone in the chat said something lovely, which is you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And I think it's the exact same thing. It's okay to not be okay. We get put into circumstances in life, but the idea is how do we manage those things? And so it's really important. I just wanted to share some helplines. You can feel free to screenshot, but I will be sharing the presentation with Anissa and Melanie as well, so they can share it on with you guys. But these are some helplines that we have. And it's also important to note that in South Africa, we do struggle with mental health resources and services. And it's something that we're trying to better as well. That's what we do with our advocacy work. We want more resourcing for community mental health, especially. But these are some great helplines that might be able to help and support. But again, going to your GP could be really useful as well. I just want to answer, there's a question about, I see the website, themighty.com is shown. Is that a website to get video material for programs with clients? Thanks for that question, Sharon. I would say, yeah. So when we were putting this presentation together, the idea is that we troll through a few resources that are out there. But my first go-to is always the WHO website. The World Health Organization has an abundance of mental health resources. And so, just putting in mental health, WHO, and you can even say mental health and GBV, WHO, and they will have videos, infographics, resources as well. Our website at the SAFMH is also we're also a very important resource, and we have some materials as well. But if there's also anything that you're looking for, you can definitely reach out to us and we can support there too. I'm looking at time and I think we're having lots of discussions. Were there any burning questions just before I touch on 2 points quickly before we round up the session? Any other questions? I'm not sure if someone's asking the difference between mental health condition. Oh, so you're asking the question. So maybe I wasn't clear, but basically there is no difference between mental health condition and mental illness. It's just the terminology. So in mental health, you'll find that terminology has come a long way. I mean, our organization was, because we're 100 years old, we started at a time where mental health was not the term people used. We were actually called the South African Federation for the Feeble-Minded, which is awful because it really started out of the need to kind of look at spaces to care for persons with intellectual disability. So we do, a lot of our community organizations support persons with intellectual disability as well as persons with psychosocial disability. So when you think about mental health condition, mental illness, they are the same thing. It's just terminology. Some people use it interchangeably. And what I said about, if you're speaking to a person with lived experience, it's just about asking them which term they prefer. I hope that clears that up. So I just want to chat a bit about women and mental health. Gender really is a strong factor with regards to a person's mental health. If we think about gender, it can determine the power and control that one has over our social position, our status, how we're treated, but also the access to services in society. And of course, we know because of gender inequality that women are usually disadvantaged because of the role of gender. There are women-specific risk factors to experiencing poor mental health or a mental health condition. The fact that more women than men are the main carers for not just children in the household, but probably for all family members as well and other relatives. And so intensive caring can really affect one's emotional and physical health, as well as one's finances, and our ability to take part in social activities as well. More and more research is coming out about this, but hormonal changes really can increase the risk of symptoms of certain mental health conditions. So things like perinatal depression, endometriosis, PMDD, which is, post, I'm trying to get it. It's about your menstruation. It's premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And all of these, more and more research is proving that actually our hormones as women can really impact our mental health as well. Another fact is that women often hold low income, low status jobs, and are more likely to live in poverty than men. And that can also affect our mental health. And then again, the physical and sexual abuse of women and girls have long-term impact on mental health, especially when there's no support being received. And, maybe they've, left the abusive situation, but they've not kind of received any kind of support and help afterwards. That can also really affect their mental health. So from the WHO, some facts, is that depression, anxiety, psychological distress, sexual violence, and domestic violence do affect women to a greater extent than men across different countries and across different settings. About 80% of people affected by violent conflicts around the world and who experience displacement as well are women and girls and women and children. So also important, women are nearly twice as likely as men to be diagnosed with depression. And worldwide, roughly 10% of pregnant women and 13% of women who have just given birth will experience a mental health condition, primarily that I think a lot of the time we forget and we don't concentrate on. Something for us to remember is that as women, we have so many roles and responsibilities that it can be exhausting and stressful. And this all takes a toll on our mental health. And so whilst the rates of mental health conditions are almost identical for men and women, there are certain disorders like depression and anxiety that are more common among women. And again, specifically that women are nearly twice as likely as men to be diagnosed with depression. Now, when we're looking at that fact and that statistic, it could speak to a number of things. Firstly, that, women are more likely to reach out for help than men. So they might get the diagnosis more as well. Also, depression manifests differently. And I talked about mental health conditions manifesting differently. So with women, it's more those generic symptoms of depression, or those more common, which is the very low mood, the prolonged sadness, not wanting to take part in activities, isolation. But within men, what research is showing that depression actually manifests as huge irritability, anger, and taking part in activities that are quite detrimental to our health as well. So that's why this could also be the case, is why women are nearly twice as likely than men to be diagnosed with depression. That statistic is also interesting when we look at the fact that whilst women are nearly twice as likely to be diagnosed with depression, men are twice as likely to die by suicide. And we know that depression has a direct relation to suicide. And again, the research is interesting there because, research shows that men are more likely to, again, not be diagnosed with depression, not want to take care of their mental health. But when they do take their lives, it's in a more a harsher way or more violent means as well. And so that's an interesting statistic. And it's important to note that in South Africa, we do have very high rates of suicide amongst men as well. When we think of the gender bias, this is really speaking to the fact despite women seeking help for mental health problems in primary health care more often, sometimes they're not always getting the help that they need. And that's because women are seen to be too emotional or dramatic or extra, and kind of dismissed rather than being taken seriously for their mental health concerns. It's also interesting to note that men are more likely than women to disclose problems with alcohol and substance use to healthcare providers. And that's because of stigma. And so, a substance use disorder is a mental health condition. And so that can kind of go under noticed as well, because women feel too stigmatized to come forward with that. And so gender can be a barrier to accurate identification and treatment of psychological disorders. So I think when we think of what we need more of then is that we need to be enhancing protective factors against the development of mental health struggles. So this includes psychological support for women, especially women who are experiencing difficulties in other social settings. We want to make sure women feel autonomous and they have that financial independence to perhaps exercise more control in response to severe events like abuse. We want to see more programs and activities that address the social determinants of mental health. And we want to make sure that these programs are designed in a gender sensitive way, and that they actively promote gender equity. And we also want to see more of an improvement to economic and social circumstances, especially in our country. Adverse changes to employment and income really can increase gender inequality as well as mental health struggles. Um, these are just some examples of interventions about protecting women's mental health around the world. In South Africa, we do have a perinatal mental health project that provides mental health services for pregnant and postnatal women. I really like the one in Tanzania, which is called Tap Elderly Women's Wisdom for Youth. And this really is where elderly women are trained to provide social and mental health support to young people, but through using their lived experience and their life stories to kind of empower the community, but also to. And then quickly, just wanting to touch on stigma. Stigma, again, is one of the biggest barriers to people seeking mental health help or mental health care services. And a quote by someone who shared their life story with us is that, "I wish people understood it more. I wish people weren't so scared of it. And I wish people knew that it wasn't a permanent thing, that it is a process. I wish people knew that someone with bipolar is doing the best they can under the circumstances. Sometimes I just feel like maybe it would have been easier if I had a terminal illness, that I would get more sympathy and more understanding than I do with this illness." And so that was really a clear indication about the stigma that still exists within society with regards to mental health and mental health conditions. The fact that someone would prefer to have a terminal illness because you're seen to get more care or prioritize more sympathy or empathy from people rather than if you have a mental health condition. Another story that we've heard with this direct kind of circumstance is someone who they first developed brain cancer. They were working at one of the big banks in the country. And when they developed brain cancer, the company was so helpful, gave them their full leave, visited the person in hospital, gave them flowers, things like that, really eased them back into the workspace. And then a couple of months later, they were diagnosed with schizophrenia. And while they were in hospital, they were basically forced to sign like unemployment papers. And so that just shows the difference between, this understanding of cancer, but something like schizophrenia, oh no, you're not able to work. And just being treated differently as well. So we just really need to be mindful of the fact that stigma does still exist. There are types of stigma. This is an infographic we used for intellectual disability, but these types of stigma exist across the spectrum for mental health conditions. It's self-stigma. So this is where a person is aware of all the negative stereotypes that they actually turn against themselves. And self-stigma really affects people's ability to get help that they need. Stigma by association. So some family members, they're stigmatized because of their loved ones' mental health conditions. Even staff and people who work within the mental health space are stigmatized. There's the public stigma. So, there's a link between these negative stereotypes and connotations of persons with mental health conditions. You think violent, crazy, shouldn't be, they should be locked up. And people really experience that. And then there's systemic stigma, which refers to policies and practices that can really disadvantage persons living with mental health conditions as well. When we look at what mental health stigma can sound like, it's things like, as I was saying, everyone has anxiety, just don't worry about it. So really minimizing people's experiences, saying things like it's all in your head. We see this a lot with people who live with psychosocial disability. You can still walk, so you don't have a disability. Therapy and medication are just scams. That's really detrimental. Can't you just choose to be happy? And also, you're too young to have any real mental health challenges. And that's definitely a stigmatizing thing to say, and also something very inaccurate, because research actually shows that mental health conditions manifest by the age of 14. So it can manifest by the age of 14, but it goes underdiagnosed because people just refuse to see it. A lot of people think teenagers are teenagers, you go through mood swings. But the truth is most people probably develop their mental health condition at age 14. And then they wouldn't have taken care of it. And then it prolongs and prolongs. And that's kind of, they might only show real symptoms later in life when they're then triggered as well. Tackling stigma, that something we can all try and do is saying things like, if someone wants to share their lived experience with you or what they're going through, saying things like, thank you for sharing with me. I value you and I value your experience. A lot of the time we feel that, oh, well, this person has a mental health issue. They must tell me what it is and I'm going to diagnose them. But the truth is we all struggle with our mental health at any point. We all understand what it means to not have a good day. And so that's kind of the space we need to come from when we're talking to people about their mental health. We want to share first our experience and then encourage the other person to share. And it usually creates a safer space because they feel like, oh, wow, I'm not going to be judged because they've just shared what they've gone through. Saying things like, I just want you to know I'm here for you. If someone is struggling to find support or help, maybe offering to help them. Saying things like, that sounds really tough and I'm really sorry that you're going through that. Things like, you can call me if you ever want to talk. Is there anything I can do to support? I think really tackling stigma really just sounds like being supportive and being understanding. We again worked with that organization I mentioned earlier, Massive Vware, to put together a video on stigma where we spoke to persons with lived experience of mental health conditions who reside at one of our community-based residential facilities in Joburg. And it was a really interesting time, and please, I would love it if you guys could all watch the video. Again, I'll share the presentation so you can watch it through the link. But the idea really is that when we shift our attitudes, we can change lives, because when there's less stigma, people are more likely to reach out for help as well. So noting that we have about 12 minutes left for questions, I did want to get through that. I'm sorry for rushing through the last bit as well. I see some questions in the chat, so we can go through those as well, because just mindful that I want us all to be able to have a discussion and share. I'm very mindful that I've shared a lot of information with you. So we can use this time to unpack some questions you might have. I'll go through the questions that are in the chat, but also then we can feel free to unmute and share as well. So I see someone saying it means bipolar is not curable. One just need to accept the condition and take care. Yeah, I think a lot of people struggle with this when it comes to a severe mental health condition. If you are diagnosed with a severe mental health condition, the truth is you will live with that condition for the rest of your life. But the good news is that it doesn't have to ruin your life. You can still live a very fulfilling life. You can still have great relationships. You can still, fulfill your dreams. You can work, you can have good relationships, you can take part in activities, you can be an important part of our society and our social fabric as well. There are a lot of people who live with severe mental health conditions who are doctors, who are lawyers, who work within our spaces, and we're not even aware because of how taboo it can be, and because of how stigmatized it still really is. So as much as we can say, it's not curable, it's something that you can take care of and manage as well. The next question is dementia a mental health condition? So it's interesting. With dementia, we classify it more as a neurological condition, and it's something that is outside of our scope at the Federation because we do focus mainly on intellectual disability and mental health conditions. But dementia is more neurological, and it's, a degenerative neurological disorder that a lot more research is coming out about as well. Let's see. How do services such as Christian narrative and other counseling work with you as professionals? The reason is that professional services are unreachable due to costs or distance. Yeah, thanks for that question, David. I think from our side, again, we're advocates and we see, because of the fact that, as you mentioned, the high cost of, psychology in the country, the fact that most mental health services are inaccessible, we do advocate for the model of task sharing. It's something that the World Health Organization advocates for, especially for low and middle income countries, where we start training community-based counselors, look at how do we involve traditional healers, involve churches, pastors within the church, and bring us all under one narrative, because we understand that people don't just seek help from the medical profession. Most people are going to go to, and in fact, research, or your religious carer as well, or religious counselor that's offered. So our understanding is that that's great as long as you're getting that help. But of course, we also want the people who are providing that help to have the full understanding and to understand that maybe their services can only go so far. How do they then refer when they are dealing with a severe mental health crisis, so that those services can then be tapped into as well? So we never shy away from people accessing the help that they feel what they need. The idea really is that the help that they're getting, hopefully they understand the referral process as well. And those are the things we're working on within the advocacy space. Someone asking, so how do you deal with loss of memory? It's been 4 years. I'm not recovering from that, and it really bothers me. I forget easily, and it is hard to master information fast now. Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not a clinician. I'm so sorry, Samantha. So I think the best thing, if you're concerned about your mental health, your cognitive ability, the best thing to do is to seek help, go to the doctor and express what you're feeling, your concern, and then take the information there. Again, it's very interesting when it comes to our mental health. We're so worried, I guess, about what we'll hear from the doctor or being judged, but we don't walk around with a broken arm forever and we're just like, oh, my arm's broken, but I'm not going to go sort it out. We immediately go to the hospital to get that care. And the same thing with our mental health. If we're not feeling ourselves, if we feel that something is wrong with our cognitive ability, we need to be taking care, because the last thing we want is to be living within that poor mental health space, to be having issues with our cognitive abilities as well. So, I think if there was a specific accident that caused the memory loss as well, it's important to kind of see how you can get the support that you need. And then also seeing someone saying, morning, is mental health hereditary? Thanks so much for that question. I addressed it a bit in the beginning of the presentation, but whilst genetics can be a risk factor for a mental health condition, so there is research that points to that connection where genetics can play a role. So if your parents had a mental health condition or your grandparents, then maybe you'll develop one, but it is not decisive, right? Because your parent could have had a mental health condition. It doesn't automatically mean that you will as well. So we do shy away from saying mental health conditions are hereditary, but genetics are a factor that can increase risk as well. So if you are concerned, it is worth seeking support and mentioning the fact that, I'm just worried because family members do have mental health conditions. I want to know if I do. You'll then go through a few assessments. And again, the only way that you can be diagnosed is by going through assessments with a mental health professional. I see someone asking, can anyone recommend a postgraduate course in psychiatric ill health conditions if I don't have time or money to do a master's in clinical social work? I've been looking at psychiatric nursing modules. Thanks, Nadine. I am not the right person to be asking about that, but I do think a lot more people are looking at SACAP, but I know that that's more psychology side. And, community psychiatry is something that is very important in the country. And I know that there's a very small group of people that focus on it. There's Professor Leslie Robertson is her name, and she's one of like the best community psychiatrists we have in the country. And I know she's a lecturer at WITS, but it is very expensive. Even the SACAP modules, one of the things we've heard is that psychiatry as a module is being taken out of, your undergrad nursing diplomas as well. And that's a cause for concern because we believe everyone, especially if you're a nurse, should be going through the psychiatric training as well. So I'm not too sure there. Someone saying, I have to 100% agree. Holistic multidisciplinary services are really important, which in turn means that service providers need to learn how to operate and design treatment plans that are inclusive of different modalities, 100%. A question, how do I help someone who's suddenly withdrawn unemployed and is in denial? Thanks for that question, Palani. I think, the best way, again, to help someone is you can't, like I said, force someone to understand that they're going through a mental health struggles. The best thing to do is really come from a space of concern. I would advise you not to come from a space of wanting to diagnose and to say something's wrong with you, but really come from a place of, you're going through a really difficult time now. I can only imagine what you're feeling like. Do you want to have a chat? And ask them to share their feelings. You can share your feelings of when you've gone through a tough time and how the things you experienced, and maybe see if that helps them to open up again. I think the worst thing that we can advise is for you to just go in and start saying, you have 1, 2, 3 condition, you need help. That's not the most helpful way. But it's really about coming from that place of empathy and compassion and just listening and providing a safe space for someone to share. And okay, someone just saying that they would like some training and referrals. Thank you so much. Yeah, again, we offer our awareness trainings from the Federation as well. I will put a link. I'll just type in our website here. And you can definitely look us up, send through an email. This is all our information. You can feel free to email me directly if you have any more questions. You can also email us at info@safmh.org if you have specific training requests. Again, we don't do what necessarily training in our words, but we really are looking at raising organizational awareness. We want organizations to understand what mental health is so that they can understand how they can create a mentally friendly environment in the workspace. And we also just want to create as much awareness within different spaces as well. And as I mentioned at the beginning, with the national shelter movement, really what was coming through is the fact that there are a lot of mental health issues within the shelters, but no real understanding of it and wanting to know how can they support the women who come through with mental health conditions. But of course, as someone mentioned earlier, it's like a whole of society way that we need to address these issues. And really, it's also about looking at how do we better the social determinants of mental health to then address mental health. And we should all be working together within the space to support one another. And I think a lot of the times in the social justice space and in the social issue space, we kind of work in our silos, not realizing how intersectional all the issues really are as well. Sorry, I just see someone asking, what type of help should one refer a teenager who is struggling at school and not getting along with one of the parents? Yeah, there's so many different individual cases, and it can be a real struggle, especially if, they're not speaking to their parent as well. But when it comes to youth mental health, I think for a very long time we've neglected it. And the truth is, we do advocate for more mental health in schools. We want more awareness, but we also need to be making sure that awareness is coming through to the parents as well, because there's no use in a young person learning about mental health at school and learning about their feelings, but then going home to their parents and saying, I'm really struggling, mum, I might need some help. And then the mother not understanding what that is or stigmatizing it themselves. So we also encourage parents to have open conversations with young people, but anyone who works with young people, if you're teachers as well, if you know a young person, creating again that safe space, because young people imitate what adults do, and they're not going to say that they're struggling if an adult is not able to open up and express that themselves as well. So we really encourage people, if they want to create a safe space, to speak to young people as if they're young adults as well, depending on the age. And if they're a teenager, maybe they're 16 years old. And the truth is that young people know about mental health. We're finding more and more young people understand mental health. We run a youth forum with 18 to 24-year-olds. And the knowledge that they have, the understanding they have of mental health, but also knowing the services so I would say just having a conversation with them. But again, there's no one way to do it, because if you're not the parent, there's issues of having, forcing help upon them, but just making sure the young person also knows the different ways that they can get support is important as well. See, just lots of email addresses. Thanks, guys. I think this will be helpful for the National Shelter Movement as well. And I think, yeah, I see another. Oh, it's the same question. Sorry. I was saying that if you're struggling with memory loss, I'm not too sure if it was caused by an accident, but I would definitely reach out to my GP to have a conversation about it. And it might be because memory loss is very cognitive. A lot of the time when we speak to mental health conditions, as I said, there are those like structural and individual factors as well. Whereas like memory loss is very, very cognitive. It's very kind of focused on the brain. So, you know, it's not necessarily because of a mental health condition. But what I would say is if you're worried about with concerns about our mental health or our cognitive abilities, and just sitting with it, because we can cause our own stresses and our own anxiety by not getting help for something that we need. Again, as I mentioned, we wouldn't walk around with a broken arm. We would really be I guess, we would reach out for that support from a doctor. We would go to the hospital immediately. And I think we need to start prioritizing our mental health in the same way. So I said someone saying cell phone or gaming is also current addiction to youth. How do you help them? Thanks for the question, David. I think, again, we are not clinicians, so we don't provide those direct services. But, from our mental health organizations, they have been mentioning the fact that gambling has become an issue within the community. And so, really speaking to helping the community understand the addiction behind gambling, the dangers of gambling. But we also understand that at an advocacy level and, a national policy level, that people are struggling with income, so we can't just address the issue of gambling at an individual level and say, you shouldn't gamble. We need to be talking to, the department, Department of Labor. We need to be talking to Treasury about how do we make sure that young people have access to employment so that they're not gambling, so that they're not spending all their time on the cell phone as well. But again, those are more clinical things, and people who focus within the youth space and addiction, they do provide that support. But from our side as advocates, we really see the larger structural issue of why people might be turning to gambling on the phone as well. So that's really where we sit. Thanks for all the questions, guys. I see that it is 10:33 and I'm sure I've gone over my time. I'm going to hand it over to Anissa again. But thank you, everyone, for attending the session and for, listening to me. I hope that I've shared some important information, some valuable information. My email is michelle@sfmh.org. I'll pop it into the chat again. Please feel free to reach out to us as well. And I think from my side, just remember that it's okay to not be okay, and that we all need to be taking care of our mental health. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for an awesome presentation. I know that whoever joined us this morning got a lot of value out of it. I think the engagement was great. People asked a lot of questions, and we know that mental health affects all of us because we know that mental health is not only about having a mental condition or a mental disorder. Our mental health is something like our physical health, our mental health, and we all know that we function in totality. If the one part is not doing too okay, we're going to struggle in other parts, right? Yes, thank you for taking the time to answer all questions. Thank you, everybody, for engaging, for participating, for asking the questions. And I look forward to having you at our next webinar. We usually have, for those of you who don't know, the National Shelter Movement of South Africa has monthly webinars. So today is somewhere along the middle of the month, so you should get some kind of notification from us about our next webinar. Thank you everybody for sharing your details. We will be sharing the recording and the presentation. Thank you, Michelle, for allowing that. And also for those of you who haven't, you can always refer people who haven't joined to our website for our YouTube details, and you should find recordings on there as well. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.